So, welcome to this explainer. I want you to step into the shadows with me for a minute. Imagine a realm where this being, the architect of Inkblot, just leans forward, right? And its whole form is literally made of shifting liquid midnight. Today, we're going to witness the absolute collapse of rigid order as we dive into the architecture of the beautiful stain. Picture this. A shimmering twilight drops over this totally ruined landscape. The air is incredibly heavy. Up above, there's this fractured halo of clock faces, and it starts slowing its backward spin, clicking into this heavy, synchronized rhythm. Reality itself is shifting, and it all starts with just a single, cosmic drop of chaos that's about to completely unravel an entire empire.
Now, the core philosophy behind this whole cataclysm, it's actually pretty simple, but man, is it devastating. Quote, "A perfect line invites a strike. A clean page demands a spill." Okay, so that's not just some nice poetry. That's actually the architect's fundamental thesis on existence. You see, to the architect, stasis, like absolute unchanging order, is a massive, dangerous anomaly. The high sorcerers of this realm, well, they thought perfection meant freezing everything right in place, right? Just creating this totally unyielding, clean page of reality. But the architect? The architect knows that absolute order is basically begging to be broken. I mean, a universe simply cannot breathe if it's trapped in a rigid line. So the retaliation we're going to look at, it's swift, it's beautifully destructive, and yeah, it is completely inevitable.
All right, let's look at exactly how this unravels in Act 1, the cosmological ripple effect. And the destruction here doesn't actually kick off with some massive explosion, but literally just a single cosmic drop landing on the jagged spire.
And wow, this drop brings some immediate, honestly terrifying consequences to what's called the bleeding ledger. It literally pierces the fabric of reality, fundamentally corrupting the High Sorcerer's cosmic records. So history isn't just being questioned here, it is actively rewriting itself. Events that were supposedly cemented into the kingdom's records, like the literal bedrock of their reality, they just dissolve into these unreadable pools of ink. I mean, imagine the sheer panic. You've got a High Sorcerer who relies entirely on centuries of inherited authority, just watching as their royal bloodlines, the very things giving them power, literally melt away. Every legal decree, every foundational law is just entirely voided as the cemented facts of the past literally liquefy. The ink itself ruins the official records. It basically proves that inherited authority means absolutely nothing when the past itself becomes fluid.
And here's the thing about the architect. It doesn't operate in standard linear time. Actually, scratch that. It operates in what's known as high time. So because the timeline is completely shattered, this chaos unleashed by the three spirit siblings in the present moment, it doesn't just march forward, it echoes simultaneously across multiple eras. It's crazy. Centuries in the past, these rigid ancestors of the townspeople suddenly feel their tightly scheduled, perfectly ordered lives just fracture with these unexpected wild impulses. And then, millennia in the future, their distant descendants are waking up dreaming of a marketplace literally pouring liquid laughter. This Inkblot's chaos is basically a shockwave, hitting the past, the present, and the future all at the exact same instant.
Moving on, we shift our focus upward in Act 2, Collision on Wet Parchment. Reality itself essentially turns into this massive, damp sheet of wet parchment, this super fragile canvas where two massive cosmic forces just completely collide.
So right here, we witness what is basically the ultimate visual and philosophical clash. On one side, you've got the High Sorcerers, and they are relying heavily on static traps, basically trying to isolate whim and freeze reality into a single unchanging moment. But on the other side, the architect just raises this hand of smoky, iridescent starlight, right? And traces this slow, really deliberate arc across that wet parchment horizon, leaving a permanent streak of shifting indigo void just hanging in the air. It's literally the rigid, brittle traps of the sorcerers hopelessly trying to contain this fluid, bleeding magic of starlight and liquid midnight. There's just no way.
Which brings us to the architect's ultimate judgment, hummed in a voice layered with the echoes of ancient, unborn civilizations. Quote, "They failed to see that stasis is the true anomaly." This completely exposes the fundamental flaw in the sorcerer's absolute authority. They built their entire empire on this belief that perfect, static order was just the natural state of the universe, and that unpredictability was some kind of disease they had to cure. But they had it completely backward. A universe is fundamentally built on change, right? On whim, on the completely unexpected. Trying to freeze it forever? That's the real crime against nature here. Absolute authority fails because it absolutely cannot bend. And therefore, it just has to break.
And that beautifully sets up our final act,
a beautifully ruined world. See, the architect doesn't just destroy, it creates. It actually tasks the spirit siblings to be co-authors of this incredible, new chaotic reality.
Okay, so you have to picture the sheer visual horror experienced by the royal cartographers when it comes to this ink blot cartography. First, ink just starts spontaneously bleeding across the official maps of the known world. But it's not just the paper that's changing. As the ink moves on the parchment, the actual physical geography shifts in the real world. Seriously, imagine sitting there watching a blot of ink slide across a map, and you look out the window, and physical mountains are literally tearing themselves from the earth and moving. Rivers are drying up in an instant. Where empty plains stood for millennia, vast, entirely uncharted forests just suddenly erupt right out of the soil. The official maps are rendered completely, totally useless, because the world itself has become as fluid as wet ink.
Now, as the geography shifts, so do the borders of power, creating what we call shattered margins. All those boundaries that were once enforced by ironclad treaties and impenetrable magical barriers degraded instantly. They transform into these shifting, really unreliable margins, effectively becoming lawless zones of pure potential. I mean, think about how wild this is. The very physical geometry of the land now warps and bends based solely on the moods and whims of the travelers passing through it. You simply cannot police a border that changes its shape just because the person walking across it happens to be feeling melancholic or joyous, right? The entire rigid structure of the world is just completely shattered.
So, this establishes the new law of the land, which is known as the crucible scale. That localized reality collapse we saw, it's expanded into a global phenomenon. No longer can absolute authority just be inherited by blood or commanded through some rigid top-down hierarchy. That fails completely now. Instead, any claim to leadership or power, it has to be continually justified, like every single day, against the unpredictable whims of a universe that has finally rediscovered how to laugh. It is this terrifying yet incredibly beautiful meritocracy of chaos, where you only get to hold power if you can actually navigate the mess.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider the architect's ominous final directive to the living ink. Picture its fractured crown spinning forward into this blinding blur of impossible futures, as the architect whispers for the ink to just go forth and fill the world with messy mischief. It poses this really profound question. How many laws will they draft before they realize the ink itself has turned against them? I really want you to take that away with you today. Just consider the absolute futility of rigid order, when the very medium used to write the rules, the ink, the history, the fabric of reality itself, just refuses to sit still. When the universe decides it wants to become a beautiful stain, can any law possibly contain it? Well, something to think about. Thanks so much for exploring the architecture of chaos with me today.